In this video, I will be installing Active Directory Federation Services on Windows Server 2012 R2. In order to complete the install, you need a certificate to use with Certificates Services. If you do not have Certificates Services installed on your network, see our previous video on how to install an Enterprise CA for use with Active Directory Federation Services. This will provide basic Certificates Services, allowing you to get Active Directory Federation Services running. However, in a production environment, you will most likely deploy a more sophisticated certificate solution. I will now change to my Windows Server 2012 R2 server and start the install of Active Directory Federation Services. To start the install, first of all, I will open Server Manager. Once Server Manager is open, I will select the option Add Roles and Features. This will start the Add Roles and Features wizard. Once past the welcome screen, I will select the default option, Role-Based or Feature-Based Installation. On the next screen, I need to select the server that I want to install the Active Directory Federation Services role on. Once I have selected the server and moved on in the wizard, on the next screen, I need to select the role Active Directory Federation Services. Once selected, I will move on to the Select Feature screen. In this case, I will not select any additional features and will move on to the next screen of the wizard. The next screen is the welcome screen for the Active Directory Federation Services part of the install. Once I skip past this screen, I will get to the Confirm Selection screen. This screen will show me which roles and features are about to be installed. In this case, only the one role is being installed. When I press Install, the Active Directory Federation Services role will be installed, which takes a minute or two to complete, so I will pause the video and return shortly. Now that the install is complete, the next step is to configure Active Directory Federation Services. The Active Directory Federation Services wizard will ask for a certificate, so I first need to obtain a certificate from my Enterprise CA. To do this, I will right-click the Start menu, select Run, and enter in MMC. The Certificate Admin tool does not appear in Server Manager, so it needs to be accessed using MMC. Once running, I need to select Add Remove Snap-in from the File menu, and then select Certificate from the list of available snap-ins. Once selected, when I press Add, I will be prompted for the scope of certificates that I will want to look at. In this case, I will select the option for Computer Account, as the server itself will require this certificate. The next screen asks which computer you want to manage certificates on. In this case, I will accept the default option of the local computer, and then complete the wizard and exit MMC. If I expand down to the Personal folder under Certificates, this will show all the certificates created for that server. This is not the view that I want, so the view needs to be changed. To do this, right-click Personal and select Options under the View submenu. If this submenu does not appear, refresh the Personal folder, as the option may not appear if a refresh has not been performed. Once Options has been selected, I next need to tick the option Certificate Purpose under Organize View Mode By. Once I press OK, you will notice that the view has changed. The certificate that I want to create needs to go under the folder Server Authentication. To create a new certificate under Server Authentication, right-click Server Authentication and select Request New Certificate under the submenu All Tasks. Once selected, this will launch the Certificate Enrollment Wizard. Once past the Welcome screen, the next screen will ask which enrollment policy you want to use. In this case, I've not created any additional enrollment policies, so I will leave it on the default option of Active Directory Enrollment Policy. What enrollment does is allows the server to obtain a certificate automatically from a certificate authority with no administrator interaction. Also, the enrollment policies takes care of renewing the certificate or replacing it as required, taking all the hard work out of the process for the administrator. In this case, I have used enrollment, as it is a simple process to get Active Directory Federation Services going. For a better understanding of which certificates should be used and how they should be used, see our certificate course. Once I press Next, I will be able to select a certificate from the templates available on the CA. In the previous video, I created this template, ADFS SSL Certificate. If you need to do this, please see our previous video on how to do so. Once the certificate is ticked, all I need to do is press Enroll, and the server will obtain a certificate from the CA. The good thing with enrollment is that it will also keep the certificate up to date, renewing it and obtaining a new certificate if required. Once I press Finish, the certificate has been added to the local store, so I can now close MMC. The next step is to configure Active Directory Federation services, which I will do by selecting the exclamation mark and then selecting the option Configure the Federation service on this server, which will launch the configuration wizard. On the welcome screen, notice the option Create the first Federation server in a Federation server farm is selected. In this case, I do not have any existing Federation servers on the network, so I will leave it on this option. Notice the second option, Add a Federation server to a Federation server farm. If you have an existing Federation server on the network, you can combine these Federation servers together to form a cluster. When these servers are in a cluster, they will work together, meaning Federation services will be available even if one of the Federation servers were to fail. If you have used previous Active Directory Federation services on a previous version of Windows Server, you will remember an option for Standalone. This option would allow a single Active Directory Federation server to be installed, which could not be added to a farm later on. This option has been removed in Windows Server 2012 R2. Once I press Next, on this screen I will be asked which user I want to use to perform the configuration. In this case, I am logged into the server using a domain administrator account, so I will leave this user selected and move on. On the next screen, I need to select which SSL certificate I want to use. You will notice in the drop-down box is the certificate that I obtained earlier using enrollment. I used enrollment as it is a simple way to get a certificate. However, you can also use the import option if you were given a certificate in a file. At the bottom of the screen, I need to enter in a user-friendly name for the Federation service. This will be displayed to the end user, so choose a display name that is meaningful to the end user. Once I move on to the next screen, a service account needs to be created to run Active Directory Federation services with. Notice the warning message at the top of the screen. When I press Show More, I can see the whole message. This is telling me that a PowerShell command needs to be run to create a KDS root key. A managed service account is one in which Windows manages the creation and passwords for the service account. Rather than having the administrator have to worry about configuring a password for this account, Windows does this for you. In Windows Server 2012, in order for this to occur, a root needs to be created and replicated to all domain controllers. This root key is used to generate passwords. By having the one root key, this helps managed service accounts that are being used on multiple systems to have the same password. This command runs in PowerShell but does require Active Directory tools to be installed on the server, which are not installed on this server. In order to run the PowerShell command, I will navigate back to Server Manager and select the option All Servers. This will only show NYDC1, which is a domain controller, which I will right-click on and select the option Windows PowerShell to launch an instance of Windows PowerShell on NYDC1. Once PowerShell has opened, I can now run the command, which should only take a couple of seconds to run. Once complete, the KDS root key will be created on this domain controller. This is an important fact to remember, as this domain controller will need to replicate this information to the other domain controllers in the domain. As a safety measure, domain controllers will wait up to 10 hours from when the key is created to ensure that you are able to answer password-related queries that relate to that key. Now that the key has been created, I will exit out of here and go back to the configuration wizard. The option Create a Group Managed Service Account is grayed out, so I will press the previous button and then the next button to refresh this screen. Notice now I can select the option Create a Group Managed Service Account. And I will enter in the name FSGMSA for Federation Services Group Managed Service Account. Once the name is entered, I will move on to the next screen. On this screen, the wizard will ask if you want to use the Windows Internal Database or SQL Server. In this case, I do not have a SQL Server configured on my network, so I will select the default option of Windows Internal Database and move on. The next screen will allow the administrator to review what is going to happen. In this case, the Windows Internal Database is not installed on this system, so the wizard will also install this. The next screen will perform a prerequisites check. Notice a warning message has appeared about the Managed Service Account. When a new KDS key is created, 10 hours must pass before Windows can start using it for Managed Service Accounts. For this reason, the Active Federation service may fail to start until 10 hours have passed. If you know that you are installing Active Directory Federation services in the future and will be using a Group Managed Service Account, it is worth the time to run the PowerShell command in advance. Once I press the Configure button, the server will be configured to run Active Directory Federation services. This process does take a minute or so to complete, so I will pause the video and return shortly. Once the configuration is complete, notice that I get the same warning message telling me the KDS key has just been created and 10 hours needs to elapse. If you attempt to run the Active Directory Federation services before then, the service may fail to start. That's it. The basics for Active Directory Federation services install and configuration is now complete. In the upcoming videos, I will look at how to use Active Directory Federation services so you can start deploying it in your organization. I look forward to seeing you in those videos, and thanks for watching.